We're on the topic of federal and, to a lesser extent, state antitrust law. Uh, I like to look at these old PowerPoint slides. I created them 3 years ago as I was beginning my online teaching career. And I like this a statutory attempt to manage animal instincts. Um, and that's kind of a pride issue, if you will. The law of the jungle, the great titans of industry like to have, the best harem and all of that kind of stuff. What we're dealing with, and why do we have antitrust law? And then we're going to talk about unfair trade practices. The robber barons, and we could begin by saying maybe Cornelius Vanderbilt, although a recent biographer puts Vanderbilt not necessarily in that state, just as a very hard worker. If you read a biography of Jay Gould, that guy's a robber baron. I could only make it about halfway through the book, and I just thought, oh, this guy is so reprehensible. That's my personal feeling, doesn't necessarily represent the truth about Gould. But what they tended to do was form these trusts. And these trusts sometimes had kind of almost secret holdings, and then they would try to corner the market. Most of you don't know what Western Union is, but Western Union was kind of the AT&T of its day, or the Ma Bell of its day. It was the telegraph company. And Jay Gould was able to corner the market on all telegraphy so that he was making money every time a telegraph was sent. And, you can search and see pictures of him essentially stopping trade. And so there's a lot of stuff that goes on. I can't remember, the Northern Pacific was a major railroad. It's now mostly, I believe, part of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which leads me to another person. Warren Buffett. One of the things I query is, why haven't we pursued Warren Buffett? And I think the reason is, why haven't we pursued GE? Because if we look at General Electric, it has very large market shares in a bunch of different businesses. So it's a conglomerate. Well, in many ways, so is Berkshire Hathaway. It has large market shares, but not triggeringly large market shares. We'll see that there's some kind of triggering numbers as we go through this. They've been sort of careful that we're not trying to corner the market. We want 30-40% of it. The triggering number that we oftentimes see is about 80%. The first statute is the Sherman Act, still in place. The language has not been changed much since 1890. This is named for William Tecumseh Sherman's brother. William Tecumseh Sherman, if you don't know, was Billy Sherman. He burned Georgia and is oftentimes quoted as saying war is hell when he said war is all hell. Sherman was a pretty tough guy. His biography his memoirs are not anywhere near as good as Grant's. They're interesting, but they don't stay to the truth as closely as Grant's. Grant's are a great American work if you want to go there. This was passed in 1890. So going back to what I talked about, Commodore Vanderbilt, who owned the New York Central Railroad and controlled it with a very narrow group of owners, and he was able to kind of build an almost monopoly on transportation. The railroads were big because that's how we built the country. The fact that we were able to build railroads all the way across the nation made all of our states great, because we could ship, we could get petroleum from the ground in Pennsylvania and ship it all the way to Oregon. ship it all the way up to Seattle, put it on a boat if we needed to, coal, all this stuff. Railroads moved a lot of it. And so there is a reaction to the behavior of Vanderbilt, and not to go too deeply into it, but he tended to, and Rockefeller's another example. Rockefeller, the oil man, did some stuff, and I want to say crazy, did some stuff that made it so that if you shipped anything on other than a Rockefeller rail car, he made it bad for you. So what they were trying to do was to get these what were known as robber barons under control. And these were smart businessmen. They knew how to play the game, and they knew how to do things with one another that us ordinary folk may or may not think about. But what we're trying to do is stop the behavior where there were restraints of trade. Rockefeller had a habit of making it so that your oil was cheaper if it was shipped in a Rockefeller car. But if you didn't ship it that way, it cost way more. There were a lot of attempts at monopolies. Rockefeller tried to corner the market on kerosene. And I don't want to just throw Rockefeller and Gould under the bus. There were a number of people like this. Carnegie doesn't come off too well if you read his biography. Another book I couldn't finish. Like, I don't even, I kind of like these people. I guess it's a little bit like our modern show Shark Tank. Even though Mr. Wonderful is sometimes a bit of a jerk, he's really a pretty nice guy. I kind of like those people. They're not hard-nosed. They're more about, let me help you get better. The Sherman Act took care of some of this, but its teeth was mostly in the monopolies or testing on restraints of trade. It's always a little bit hard to get all the evidence in place to get this working. So a little bit later comes in the Clayton Act, which is really about mergers and exclusive dealing arrangements, which is almost like a merger without the title. You can only buy from us, or you can only sell this product. If you're going to sell eyeglasses, you must sell Benetton, and you can't sell anyone else. So maybe what you can see here is a pattern emerging where we'd rather have open markets. At the same time, we understand that there may be natural monopolies. Why is GE a leading company? Well, it makes great products. If you look, if you want to talk about how to run a business, one of the best things you can do is get a job at GE, take their training, and then find your career job and move the training at GE to your business. GE runs a really tight ship. I think it's the 7 Sigma stuff, and you can see that advertised or bandied about, or 6 Sigma. 6 Sigma is really common, but it supposedly comes out of the GE School of Management. But it's an internal school of management. For a while, Verizon was the dominant wireless carrier. When you looked at the service provided, it was obvious. If you had one of its competitors' services, you maybe have your phone dropped in the middle of downtown St. Louis. Your call just goes away, but it didn't, because on Verizon it had a better network. Now that's moving away a little bit, but the other one is Federal Trade Commission Act of 1914. And guess what it created? It created a bureaucracy. We'll talk about it at the tail end of what we're talking about. But it looks at what are some unfair methods of competition. Are we exclusive dealing arrangements are covered in the Clayton Act? But this gives enforcement authority to a regulatory body so that the prosecutors don't necessarily have to build this. We've got an agency that's always out there looking at what's happening in the market. Robinson-Patman Act tried to focus on price discrimination, and I'm struggling to come up with an example of that. So we're going to skip it for right now. We're not going to. There's levels of all this stuff. So looking at the Sherman Antitrust Act, we need two or more people or entities. So here what we've got is two companies trying to come together and kind of corner the market. Is there a contract? Is there a combination or conspiracy? I believe what Rockefeller was doing was that he was strong-arming the railroads so that his cars got preference over competitors' fuel. And he basically was saying, if you don't ship my stuff, I'll find another railroad. I'll put it on the Pennsy, blah, blah, blah. So he had enough of the market that he was pushing others to the side. Was there a real deal? There's a backroom smoky deal that they thought. Possible criminal penalties can attach to this because of the restraint of trade. And I think it's important to look at that. Let me see if I can get to it. That a lot of this can be civilly enforced. That is, any entity that thinks that the Sherman Antitrust Act is being violated against it can bring a civil lawsuit. Let me see if I can get to this. And an example I put there was Eaton, which is the dominant parts maker in automotive and particularly in truck parts, was sued by in Delaware. And remember, we talked about Delaware is the big corporate litigation space. And the nice thing about going to Delaware is its court decisions are really very solid. We don't have a lot of the variability we get in the circuits at the federal level. We tend to get a pretty strictly enforced stare decisis without real big attempts to expand it. But what Eaton was trying to do, it had been, I believe, bought out by PACCAR, which is, they're the makers of one of the better trucks. Now I'm blanking on it. And but what they were doing was Eaton had, let's go back to our slides. Eaton was a supplier of truck parts. Darn, it's not Mack, it's the other one, and it's not Freight Shaker. Peterbilt. I think Packard makes Peterbilt and another type, but Eaton was in a way trying to push everybody out. Customers were given a scale discount if, and this is the mathematical if and only if, Eaton parts were the primary thing that they recommended or that they utilized, and when those parts suppliers or purveyors always push the Eaton product out the door first. The defense that Eaton offered was a weak one. Our competitors could have done the same. What really hurt Eaton in this is that they had 80% of the market, and so now they're pushing for more. That's kind of a magic number, this 80%. That's when we begin to look at, is this really the best product out there, or are they gaining market advantage by doing contracts beneath the table, if you will? All right, so we're kind of looking at, this is where Eaton went a little bit beyond, and as you can see, they agreed, okay, we'll pay $500 million to these firms that we maybe are not competing with fairly. We're trying to corner market through other suppliers. Now let's look at the topic of restraints of trade. Oh, I'm sorry, I got out of my full screen thing, and I didn't recognize it. In defense of our competitors could have done the same. That's not going to go anywhere. Eaton does build a really good product. There's no doubt about it. You'll see it on all the shelves. But Eaton also has they kind of have the market cornered. So how can a small person come in and go, hey, you gotta do this for us? They don't have any market power. And so, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep the markets open. And so an arbitrary number is 80%, but that at least gives us a 10 or 20% entry fee. So, if and when you watch Shark Tank, quite often they talk about, well, this is already a flooded market and there are 3 primary shakers in it. You're only going to capture about 2% of this market. Yeah, it's $1 trillion a year market, but 2% of that is what, $20 million? And you're asking me for $1 million? I'm not seeing it. Blah, blah, blah. But if they've got a revolutionary product, by having that 2% of market space, maybe they come in and all of a sudden, instead of having 3 players, maybe now we've got 4. Otherwise the markets get stale, the products can get stale, and services can be, it's kind of the Henry Ford. You can have your Model T in any color you want so long as it's black. Now, back then, that made perfect sense in manufacturing. And he wasn't in violation of anything. He was simply saying, this is the only color I'm going to do because that's the only way I can get this out the door at a price that will sell. So, and if you look at Ford's hiring and other practices, they were pretty good until Henry died. And then we got into some issues, and there were some union strikes there, but that's a different topic. I think I covered that in my other slide. So one of the things we can look at is, has there been an agreement at the horizontal level? For instance, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile all agree. We're all going to have data plans that are $10 a month for everybody. That's price fixing per se, particularly if there is an agreement or if that's how it's actually operating. One of the things we can do, we get into these group boycotts, that maybe Verizon, AT&T won't take on Apple pills, okay? Suppliers boycott customers. So, let's just say that everybody's trying to get the Walmart pricing at warehouse. Well, we may just say, we're going to boycott all retailers except Target. The problem we get into this is a Supreme Court miasma. I haven't read every case on it, but it's just very hard to know exactly what's going to come down. It's not quite roll of the dice, but it's, it's just, it's hard to have real bright lines. The lines are fairly fuzzy, like this 80% rule is a little bit fuzzy. I think we know that as a business, if we're at the 80% line, we've got to begin watching ourselves in terms of our sales practices. Are we trying to grab too much market share? And how are we doing it? There's always going to be, because in this per se rule, there's also the back out, if you will, of the rule of reason, which is this behavior reasonable under those circumstances? One I didn't explain is buyers boycott suppliers. at some point in time, we may decide that Hertz, Avis, Thrifty, maybe 5 of the um, rental car companies all decide we're going to boycott Ford, or we're going to boycott GM, or we're going to boycott Peugeot, and here's what we're trying to do. They're engaging in kind of a collusive activity, and they're all in the same business. Again, now if we look at vertical restraints, and vertical means up and down in the chain of command, um, one of the things we see right off the bat is resale price restraints. You can sell our product, but you cannot sell it below this price nor above that price. So setting a minimum or maximum price. This is where the rule of reason oftentimes comes in, is that, wait a minute, what they're trying to do is control branding. And I hate to keep going back to Shark Tank, but Shark Tank always makes this deal of, or at least one time a show, it seems like they talk about, well, your price point is wrong. You really need to get your actual retail down to $9.99. Now, why? Well, because that's your target market. If you're selling Hermes scarves, well, you got to make sure that nobody's selling them below $199, because that's an Hermes scarf. What you're really trying to create demand for is upper end scarves. If you're not willing to pay at least $200 for one of our scarves, you can't afford our really good scarves. These are our discount scarves. So what they're trying to do is protect the brand. And have we done this? Is it too much a restraint of trade? We're probably okay. Another place where we may see non-price vertical restraints is, are we dealing kind of exclusive territories? And so you've always got to sort of look at that. Is there a rule of reason, a solid business rule, why that territory exists? Is it because of level of service of the reseller or the supplier? So, that's looking inside the supply chain in a vertical fashion. Horizontal is competitor level. So this is, I hope this makes some sense to you. It's a highly technical field. I'm trying to just give you an early introduction to it. I will freely admit this is not my strongest suit. This is one of my weakest ones. But as I follow it, mostly in the newspaper, there's no rhyme or reason to what I'm seeing in the enforcement. All right, so now we begin to get to monopolization, Section 2 of the Sherman Act. And this is really the intent of this, was let's stop the monopolies. All right? Do they possess monopoly power? We have to have, as we're looking at this, these are the elements. Have they cornered the market? And so one of the things we look at is Eaton, was it at 80%? Restrains trade, wouldn't kind of made it so that it was hard for anybody to compete with them. To get to 95%, they were found guilty of this. Is it a willful act of monopolization? The relevant market test is simply, can we block out that this is a certain block of market? Or is it a bigger entity than that? Is there a small truck parts market and they're trying to get it? Or are they monopolizing only in truck parts but not in car parts? So, it's something we're going to test. And remember, anytime we're in the law, we tend to look at, is it this, 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 and that? Or much less frequently, is it this or that or that? And one of the nice things in here for companies that have been hurt is that the companies that were negatively impacted by this willful act of monopolization, that is, was it really, were they trying to monopolize, can sue them for damages and receive treble damages. That's 3 times. So what we do now in the jury instructions, I don't believe they tell the jury this will be trebled. Otherwise, the juries might cut it back to, well, this is what we really want them to receive. Well, we actually want the juries to go, what was the negative impact? And then we're going to triple that. And that is our punishment. This is, don't go down that road, guys. Don't try this monopolization. Here's our punishment, and it's a civil punishment. You're going to pay your competitors. You're going to pay the people you hurt. Hopefully giving them money. This is a wealth transfer of a simple sort. You've ruined the market. Here we go. We're going to give your competitors money so maybe they can get back into the market. The Clayton Act at Section 7, and then the later Seller-Kefauver Act. I don't know who Seller is. And Clayton is another senator. So all these things are named for senators. Fabulous. Seller may be, sometimes these hyphenated ones, it's the guy who brought it in the House and then the guy who got it through the Senate. C. Estes Kefauver is a pretty famous senator from the 40s and 50s. Love the name, that maybe that's part of it, but big player. All right. So what we're dealing with here is mergers and acquisitions. Are we kind of creating monopolies by buying up suppliers, buying up competitors? Are we in a single line of commerce is one of the things we're going to look at. Product or service market, and this would expand to, could we maybe substitute a different product or a different service and still get basically the same thing? We're also going to look in these, is this a sectional deal? Are we going to lock up trade in a small area, geographic, local, national, international? At the time, the United States was beginning to become a big international player, and maybe we wanted to ramp this up. Certainly by the time Seller-Kefauver is passed, we were the dominant world power against the totalitarian states that were then forming, Russia and China. And so in terms of free trade, the United States was kind of the ultimate arbiter at that point in time. We've now added, and I don't cover it here, EU. The EU has very similar laws, the European Union, and so big players like Apple and Microsoft and Google and international global players have to be very careful in the EU because it's a much more rigid system, much more tight controls. So what we're looking to in the Clayton Act is the probability of a substantial lessening of competition. Will this harm competition? Is the 80% rule here in play? Kind of, sort of. I've seen these turned down when it was pretty obvious that 60% or more of the market was going to be grabbed, because the concern is it doesn't take long. We get kind of a slippery slope. Once we've given them that first 60% of the bell curve, it's pretty easy. They've got the momentum maybe to where they're going to get out to the 80%. We may cut this short. And so I'm not certain how many of you will get into this field. Teaching in the middle of the country, I don't know, I probably underestimate my students all the time. There's going to be somebody who actually knows this stuff. One of the Enron guys was a graduate of the University of Missouri Business College, and they committed felonies. So is this felonious behavior? Generally, no, but it's going to be hard to, we've got to know as we're looking at mergers and acquisitions that we may have difficulty. Recent one that came up was AT&T and T-Mobile would have taken the fourth largest internet provider and maybe the third. I think Sprint may have been slightly above at the time and made it into the second. But Verizon held 40% or more of all the traffic anyway, so it would have actually helped, but they shut it down. Now, at the same time, we've seen a ton of airline mergers. We've seen huge consolidations in the airline industry where we used to have 13 operators, we're kind of down to 7. And that's probably going to change pretty quick. Vertical is PACCAR, an ultimate customer of Eaton, bought Eaton. And now, so they've got their own supply internal lockup. But is that going to negatively impact the industry and the competition and all of that? I believe that one was permitted because there's good synergies. Here's an end user that wants to kind of manage its own supply, but they're both at the upper echelon in terms of performance. I would think that one went through. My examples, I see them all the time, and I don't remember them perfectly. Is this a market expansion, geographical or product market? We're going to tend to permit this sort of thing unless it's going to lessen competition. All right. Conglomerate mergers is a sort of a different deal. If GE bought Ameren UE, is there the potential in the marketplace for Ameren UE to become a national monopoly in terms of energy supply? Could we use GE as the tool? And I'm just pushing this out as an idea, as the tool to gain huge market share by having Ameren be the acquisition company and slowly grow its nest using GE's money, because GE is sitting on a pile of cash. Some of the defenses is that I'm buying a failing firm. I'm trying to put it back on its feet. You've got 3 elements that we're dealing with there. Another one may be, this is really a small company, relative to the market, it just doesn't have much impact. Its purchase isn't going to hurt it. There have been a tremendous number of mergers, particularly in tech recently, that have just kind of slipped under the radar because they're just not big enough. They're just little tiny sectors of Google. Google's a pretty powerful force now, and what it's done is it's taken all those assets and bought up anybody who might in any way begin to compete with them, and they've just sort of slowly expanded their product line. Are we better off with that? Some people would argue yes. We're better off when AT&T ran the phone systems. You had really good coverage anywhere AT&T was. Its competitors weren't as good at it. There's a reason Ford sold so many cars. Everybody began to have to do as well as Ford. They had to build better stuff in order to sell it. So what we're really, it's one of these animal spirits trade-offs, and that's probably why this area of the law, at least to me, is relatively frustrated. Here's a couple of others. you know, a vertical restraint. I will not sell you this product unless you also purchase that. You know, you've got to purchase the warranty on it, or you've got to be able to sell, if you will, the warranty. All right, so here's some price discrimination. Where the effect of such discrimination may be substantially to lessen competition, or tend to create a monopoly in any line of commerce. All right. The book that I built these slides from said you can't use a preferred customer discount. Well, that's not the law. You can. I mean, you know, if you're sitting here, uh, I may sell to Walmart at a lesser price because Walmart does 5 times the volume that Target does. Um, you know, is it going to lessen competition or create a monopoly in any line of commerce? You know, if we look at it ultimately, while it might hurt Target's bottom line a little, it's not going to close all their stores. There are people who just won't shop at Walmart, and there are people who just won't shop at Target. You know, boom, boom, boom. So it doesn't have much to do. So, you know, on this tying agreements, tying arrangements, if there's a valid reason to tie the products together, it's perfectly legal. You know, so maybe going back to Eaton, if we've got in a transmission, we've got all those oils and all the fluids coming in, we may not be able to bear, put a competitor's part next to an Eaton part in a replacement because the competitor's part might have a tendency to create something that corrodes the Eaton part. You know, as you're sitting there with moving parts, things come apart, seals get broken, and you get intermixing of chemicals, and it may destroy each other's parts and actually cause a bigger problem. So that we may be able to say, you know, to buy this Eaton, you've also got to buy our shell because our shell does X, Y, and Z. Theirs does not. Our part needs that. I hope. Right. Another defenses to price discrimination. Let's just say that you know, our shipping costs because of volume get lower if you buy more. You know, and so we've got all of these abilities. If you're only buying 2 carloads, we've actually got quite a big difference in shipping because you know, the railroad has a 10-car limit, or they won't even send a train here. It's just not economic for them. So if you can at least get us to a 10-carload lot, we can guarantee shipping at a lower price. You know, the problem on production. Some production lines work on a piece basis, if you will, for a variety of customers, and every time they've got to shut the line down to modify what they're doing and how they're doing it, it is an additional cost. If you can guarantee me, you know, 100,000 units, I can keep that line operating for 3 weeks straight, which is perfect for us because that then permits us to go into a kind of a normal downtime to reconfigure the line for the next customer. You know, one of the things you've always got is changing conditions, commodity or supply, molybdenum, silver, gold, anything you name, oil, natural gas. You know, these are, if the commodity price modifies, we've got a right. You know, we've always got a right to meet the competition. It seems to me, at least, this really sort of permits price wars. Is one of the things we complained about in the robber era days was that Vanderbilt, for instance, had so much money he could actually operate his railroad at a loss for 2 to 3 months or more and essentially drive the competition out of business because they couldn't do that. They didn't have the resource to do it. And that sort of is what led to the New York Central being the big player. It eventually, in a merger with the Pennsylvania Railroad, it eventually destroyed itself, but that was long after Vanderbilt was gone. But are we now, of course, if we're colluding to lower the price, we may run afoul of the Sherman Act in the two parties. Last slide, Federal Trade Commission Act et al., creation of the Federal Trade Commission. Anytime we create a bureaucrat, it's got to have something to do. But a bureaucracy such as this has some pretty strong tools. They can issue their own injunctions. They don't necessarily have to go to court. They can stop this deal right now. We're going to stop it right now, and we're going to investigate it. So they can kind of do what they call in the movie Top Gun, a Japanese inspection. We're going to not let your vegetables in, and but we don't have anybody because we got to inspect them. But we don't have anybody inspect them for 3 days. Well, guess what? Your vegetables rot on the dock. It is a problem that the FTC, if it just doesn't like the smell of this thing, can sometimes drag its feet on it. They may be able to do investigations. They can do cease and desist orders. That is, you cannot do that pricing scheme, and here's why. They usually have to tell you why and how to fix it. We've had some issues recently with bureaucracies not being quite as good at that. There are statutory exemptions that this does not apply to: unions, railroads, most of the shipping industries, the insurance companies, because those are, at least until we got into the era of potentially having healthcare sold across state line, where the insurance companies are regulated by the states. It's a slippery slope we're going down with our attempts to get healthcare at a national level. I'm going to be quiet about this, but healthcare tends to be a regional thing. Once you give the federal government broad power, it doesn't tend to give it back. The courts have implied a few exceptions. Baseball is the one that stands out the most. But we've seen in the recent airline acquisition that we're kind of, that the service at the end is much more what we're about. We used to have heavily regulated airlines, and the prices were really bad. It was very expensive, and it was, once they deregulated the airlines, we got a lot better pricing, we got a lot better flights, everything got a lot better. There are things that the states exclusively monitor, such as utilities and insurers. Let me make a side comment on insurers, particularly in the life insurance industry or the investment insurance type industry. The state of New York oftentimes controls whether these mergers are going to come on or not. This is diminishing as we've moved to more and more. Scottrade is a St. Louis company. St. Louis has a pretty big financial industry, and so Des Moines, Iowa, has a ton of insurance companies in it. So we're beginning to see some flow to other areas. Iowa is becoming kind of a hotbed of insurance, if you will. And when we think about this in terms of competition, it's probably good we have the states competing too. State antitrust laws are not the blue laws. The blue laws are about listing the security. But I think we can expect that if they exist, these antitrust laws would tend to mirror what we're seeing in the federal law. you've got to get to a certain high level to begin to violate this. When you start approaching monopoly status, we're going to look at, is this a natural monopoly? That is, do you have the best product out there? Or is this a price fixing or trade fixing? One of the things we listed here is that what is really going on. So, this one may be a hip pocket deal if you're growing a business and you're buying up competitors or you're buying up suppliers or you're buying up side service industries that are close to what your core industry is. You've got some real potential monopoly problems. When we look at the structure of, say, GE, a conglomerate, well, it owns a CT imaging scan. It owns turbine generators. It owns jet engines. It used to own and make railroad locomotives. I think it got out of that business. It has gotten rid of some of its stuff. And that's one other thing I might say is that as we get bigger, sometimes the government will, what you'll see a lot of times is the government will sort of force you to diversify. Where we may see Piggly Wiggly becoming the dominant player in the South if it were to buy out the former Bruno stores. All of a sudden, Piggly Wiggly would go from maybe having 65% of all the chain superstores in the South to 80%. Boom, that's going to trigger it. Well, what they may do is say, okay, but if you'll sell off this, if you'll come in here and show us, yeah, you can acquire these guys, but you've got to get yourself down to this magic 70% level. Get rid of some of your stores. And so then they do trading to get there. We've seen mergers where large corporations have had to actually sell off parts of their business because there were too many ties between what they were acquiring and the service or the supply chain or the service chain. So anyway, probably not the best lecture I'm ever going to give, but I think it's something that we need to know, that what we're trying to favor is more competition, more price competition, less monopoly, less seizure, less hardball tactics, more let the market dictate outcomes. If you're pushing stuff in the directions we talked about, you may be violating federal law. So how exciting was that? Thanks much.